The movie is doing catastrophically. They spent $300 million, and it currently has a 2.2 out of 10 rating.
Or what?
They're leaning into woke. Hardcore.
They're petrified.
Nobody wants a movie about true love. What kind of woman do we want out there seeking true love, Eliana? It's the outrage.
Every way that Disney changed the story, it changed it for the worse.
I wanted my money back. It was very disappointing.
So she comes off as an insufferable, whiny brat.
They're pretending like Rachel Zegler is the first of them all when she looks like Lord Farquaad in the film.
Rachel Zegler, like so many kids raised on TikTok, she's all for infantada is the only global solution.
The new Disney boss babe, who is Rachel Zegler, the inverse of happy.
No one on the right side of America can stand the star of this movie.
So apparently, according to them and according to the writers of Snow White, women can't even want to be in love anymore.
What happens when you try to modernize a classic fairy tale only to alienate your entire audience? Disney's Snow White remake should have been a slam dunk. A beloved story with a fresh twist. But instead, it turned into one of Hollywood's biggest flops. Fans were outraged, box office numbers crashed, and the entire project left Disney scrambling to pick up the pieces. But what went wrong? Was it the changes to the iconic storyline, the outspoken lead actress, Rachel Zegler? Or was it the overcorrection of trying to please everyone and end up pleasing no one? Well, buckle up, because the story behind this disaster is much more shocking than you might think. It all started with Disney's decision to take a beloved classic and completely flip it on its head. For decades, Snow White has been a story about love, innocence, and the triumph of good over evil. But when Disney announced a live-action remake, they made a bold and risky move. They wanted Snow White to be a different kind of princess, a stronger, more independent woman who didn't need a prince to save her. On paper, that might sound harmless. After all, empowering women is never a bad thing. But when you start messing with the core elements of a classic fairy tale, things get complicated. Suddenly the dwarfs, the heart and soul of the original Snow White, were sidelined. The romance that defined the entire story, gone. Instead of Snow White dreaming about finding true love, we got a woke princess who had no interest in romance at all. This wasn't just a shift in narrative, it was an overhaul. The idea of a fairy tale where love wins wasn't just updated, it was practically erased. And that's where the problem started. The fans who had loved the original Snow White for decades were left scratching their heads. Without the romance, without the dwarfs, what was left? A hollow shell of a movie that didn't feel like Snow White at all. But Disney wasn't done yet. They took things even further by replacing the dwarves, one of the most iconic elements of the original movie, with CGI magical creatures. And just like that, the characters we all loved were tossed aside, replaced by faceless digital creations. No warmth, no personality, just CGI placeholders in an attempt to cater to a new, more politically correct version of the story. The backlash was immediate. Fans weren't just upset, they were angry. It wasn't just about the changes to the movie, but about the complete disrespect for the original story and what it meant to generations of viewers. Disney thought they were creating a more progressive version of Snow White, but instead they ended up alienating the very audience who had grown up with the original fairy tale. If the drastic changes to the storyline weren't enough, Disney's casting of Rachel Zegler as Snow White only added fuel to the fire. Zegler, who was once hailed as Hollywood's next big star, quickly became the face of the backlash. It wasn't just her portrayal of Snow White that caused an uproar. It was everything she said off screen. From the moment she stepped into the role, Zegler made it clear that she didn't have much affection for the original story. In interviews, she openly expressed how she had no interest in portraying a character who was dreaming of a prince or waiting to be saved. Instead, she proudly talked about how her Snow White was a feminist icon, someone who didn't need a prince at all. The problem? The audience did want a prince, and they did want the romance that made the original so special. But that wasn't all. Zegler's social media posts quickly became a major point of contention. It wasn't just that she disagreed with the old Snow White. She went on the offensive. She made headlines for her highly controversial political statements, especially when she told anyone who supported President Trump to go away and never know peace. That kind of rhetoric didn't just alienate her critics, it alienated her potential viewers too. Disney had a massive problem on their hands. This was supposed to be a family-friendly movie, a nostalgic remake for fans of all ages. ages. But with Zegler publicly attacking half the country, it created an environment where many viewers felt they weren't welcome. And when you're the star of a blockbuster film, alienating half of your potential audience isn't a great strategy. Her apology, when it came, felt hollow. Zegler admitted she'd gone too far, but offered no real sense of remorse, leaving fans feeling even more distanced from the actress. It was clear, Rachel Zegler's polarizing persona wasn't just overshadowing her performance, it was overshadowing the entire movie. And in a world where social media reigns supreme, that kind of baggage can kill a project before it even hits theaters.
They spent $170 million to make the thing. It had the lowest opening, under $50 million, of any of these live-action Disney remakes. Rachel Zegler, she's an...
President Rachel Zegler also posted, F Trump kinds of
By the time the
posts
film's
on social
production
media.
wrapped, it was clear Disney had miscalculated big time. The backlash wasn't just coming from a vocal minority on social media, it was widespread. Fans of the original Snow White weren't just upset about the changes to the story, they were outraged by the lack of respect for the classic elements that made the movie a beloved part of Disney's legacy. First, there were the iconic dwarfs. In a move that felt like a direct slap in the face to the original, Disney decided to scrap the dwarfs altogether in favor of CGI magical creatures. This wasn't just a creative change, it was a political one. The shift was in response to actor Peter Dinklage's criticisms about the lack of opportunities for little people in Hollywood, and while Dinklage's point about representation was valid, Disney's solution wasn't. Instead of reimagining the dwarfs in a more thoughtful way, they simply erased them, making the film's new characters feel like cheap, lifeless placeholders. But the changes didn't stop there. The removal of the romantic subplot was another glaring issue. Snow White was no longer a character whose journey revolved around love and the classic happily ever after. Fans quickly realized that the very essence of the fairy tale had been rewritten, and not for the better. Instead of focusing on Snow White's connection with the prince, we were presented with a version of Snow White who had no interest in romance. While some applauded this shift, the majority of fans were disappointed that Disney had stripped away one of the most fundamental aspects of the story. The frustration wasn't just about the film's direction, it was about a complete disregard for the audience that had supported Disney for generations. Families who had once flocked to Disney movies for nostalgia and the comforting familiarity of beloved stories now felt alienated, and in the process, Disney had failed to recognize that the heart of Snow White wasn't just about progress, it was about storytelling. They weren't just making a movie, they were making a statement, and in doing so, they seemed to forget the most basic truth of filmmaking. Audiences go to the movies to be entertained, not to be lectured. By ignoring the wishes of fans and focusing on what they thought was modern, Disney opened the door for a disaster of epic proportions. The film wasn't just losing the magic of the original, it was losing the audience that had supported them for decades. It wasn't just the fans who were upset, the numbers told the whole story. Disney poured an enormous amount of money into this remake, with reports estimating the total production cost, including marketing, at around $300 million. They had high hopes for Snow White. After all, it was a classic, a story that had enchanted generations. But when the film finally hit theaters, reality struck. The opening weekend was a disaster. Instead of the $150 million plus opening that Disney had hoped for, the film struggled to muster a measly $43 million. That was catastrophic, especially for a high-budget remake that was supposed to be a guaranteed hit. And things didn't improve from there. The box office numbers barely budged, and the film quickly began to fade into oblivion. In comparison to Disney's previous live-action successes like The Lion King and Aladdin, Snow White looked like a massive failure. To make matters worse, the international markets didn't come to the rescue either. In China, a market that can be a goldmine for Hollywood films, the film reportedly earned less than $1 million. It was a clear sign that the movie wasn't resonating globally, and Disney's plans for international success quickly unraveled. This wasn't just another box office disappointment, it was a massive financial blow. For a company like Disney, whose entire business model is built around the power of its intellectual property, a flop of this magnitude sends ripples throughout the entire organization, and the implications were far-reaching. Not only did Disney lose money on the film, but they also risked damaging their brand, a brand that has been synonymous with family-friendly entertainment and magical storytelling for nearly a century. Investors began to take notice. A film that was supposed to be a crown crown jewel in Disney's lineup ended up being a disaster, and that raised serious questions about the direction the company was taking. Was this the future of Disney, a company so concerned with virtue signaling and avoiding controversy that they lost sight of what made their stories great in the first place? And behind the scenes, the pressure was building. Disney executives were reportedly blindsided by the backlash, scrambling to figure out how to salvage the project. But the damage was already done. When a film with the Disney name attached to it bombs this badly, it's not just the actors or filmmakers who face the consequences, it's the entire company.
Like this is America right now. I will love you through these 4 years as best I can. F Donald Trump. Yeah.
It's got extra musical numbers that are incredibly unnecessary
As the Snow White
that
disaster
really add to
unfolded,
that
two of
runtime.
Hollywood's most
Go woke,
outspoken
get
voices
broke, and Disney's
weighed
going
in
to lose
on what
money on
went
this movie. And I
wrong.
believe it
Joe
only
Rogan,
made
known
less than
for
$1
his
million
No Holds Barred
in China.
podcast, and Bill Maher, famed for his biting commentary, both had plenty to say about the film's catastrophic failure. And surprisingly, they both pointed the finger at the same thing: the toxic mix of wokeness and virtue signaling that was slowly eroding the heart of Hollywood. Rogan, who's rarely shy about calling out what he sees as a growing trend in the entertainment industry, saw Snow White as a perfect example of Hollywood sacrificing story for the sake of avoiding backlash. In a recent episode of his podcast, Rogan slammed Disney for making decisions based on fear of controversy rather than focusing on what really matters: entertainment. They're more worried about what people think than making a good movie, Rogan said, and he was right. When studios start prioritizing social commentary over the basic elements of storytelling, like compelling characters and emotional depth, the result is a film that feels more like a lecture than a movie. Bill Maher echoed this sentiment, highlighting the irony of trying to update Snow White with a progressive twist while completely abandoning the core of the story. For Maher, the decision to reframe the prince as a stalker and remove the dwarfs was a perfect example of woke culture overcorrecting to the point of being unintentionally offensive. Maher pointed out that by removing the dwarfs and replacing them with CGI creatures, Disney wasn't just rewriting the story, they were erasing an entire group of actors who rarely get the chance to play prominent roles. Both Rogan and Maher seem to agree on one thing: Hollywood's obsession with political correctness was undermining its ability to entertain. Rather than creating movies that could appeal to a broad audience, the entertainment industry seemed more interested in pandering to a specific group. As Maher put it, they've traded in genuine creativity for virtue signaling, and that's where Snow White went wrong. The film's failure wasn't just about the changes to the story or the casting decisions, it was about the studio's fear of upsetting anyone, leading them to lose sight of what really matters in filmmaking: telling a good, engaging story. For both Rogan and Maher, the Snow White remake was proof that Hollywood's woke overreach was becoming a problem, and they weren't the only ones who saw it. Critics across the board started calling out the film for missing the mark, and the audience's rejection was loud and clear. In trying to avoid controversy, Disney ended up creating a movie that alienated fans and failed to deliver on what people wanted from a Snow White remake. As the movie's release date came and went, the fallout from Snow White's failure became even more apparent. But the ultimate embarrassment came when Rachel Zegler herself experienced the harsh reality of her film's flop. At the premiere, what should have been a star-studded moment of triumph quickly turned into an awkward reminder that no one was showing up. On March 25th, 2025, Zegler, along with a handful of close friends, walked into a theater for what should have been a celebratory occasion, but instead of a full theater filled with excited fans, they were greeted by something far worse: an almost empty cinema. It was as if the entire theater had been abandoned, leaving Zegler and her friends to stare at an empty room. The silence was deafening. To try to save face, Zegler's friends attempted to hype the moment, with one friend even loudly shouting "Zegler" when her name appeared on the screen, trying to generate some sort of excitement. But the awkwardness was impossible to ignore. There was no applause, no cheers, just the uncomfortable silence of a movie that had failed to find its audience. The Snow White popcorn buckets, which should have been a symbol of excitement and memorabilia for fans, stood as an empty reminder of the film's failure. And then came the viral moment that truly encapsulated the disastrous premiere. In an attempt to keep things light, Zegler and her friends approached a Regal employee and asked, "Please, for For which movie? The interaction was so painful, it looked like a scene from a movie about a failed birthday party where no one showed up. Even the staff seemed to feel the awkwardness, offering minimal response to the group. This moment became emblematic of everything that had gone wrong. Zegler's attempt to salvage the evening by pretending everything was fine only highlighted the fact that Snow White's box office But
so
the
she
film's
came out to
failure
take a large
wasn't just a
dump
personal blow
on
to Zegler.
half of the country,
It was a
everyone who
wake-up
voted
call
for
the
Trump.
entire
Now, I'm guessing that
entertainment
she's not
industry.
married.
This
I'm
awkward
guessing
premiere
that she
became
doesn't
a
have
symbol
kids.
of how
The movie is a
deeply out of
complete
touch
disaster,
Hollywood
by the
had
way.
become.
Rachel
When a movie
Zegler
with
is
Disney's
extraordinarily
brand
woke,
behind
but
it
she's woke in a way
fails
that's quite deranged.
spectacularly. You can't just blame the story or the lead actress. It's a reflection of a broader issue, a culture that's so obsessed with avoiding controversy that it forgets the most basic rule of filmmaking: make something people actually want to see. If there's one thing the Snow White disaster proved, it's that Hollywood may have reached a tipping point. The film's catastrophic failure wasn't just about one movie. It was a clear warning to the entire entertainment industry. It's a message that studios need to hear. Audiences are sick of being lectured to. They want to be entertained, not pandered to. For Disney, this failure could have huge implications. Insiders are already speculating that this bomb might force the company to rethink its entire strategy for live-action remakes. The days of reimagining beloved classics with heavy-handed political messages might be over. If Snow White is any indication, the audience isn't buying it anymore. And with major flops like Lightyear and Strange World already in Disney's rearview mirror, the company is facing a serious crisis. What makes this failure even more damaging is that it comes at a time when Disney is desperately trying to hold on to its brand loyalty. For years, the company has been known for its timeless stories. Stories that could unite people of all ages, backgrounds, and beliefs. But with films like Snow White, Disney seems to have forgotten what made those stories so beloved in the first place. They weren't about preaching to the audience, they were about creating magical, universal experiences that everyone could enjoy. Now, with the Snow White remake in flames, Disney is left to pick up the pieces. The film's failure shows just how dangerous it is to ignore the core elements that made these stories work in favor of progressive ideals that alienate half the audience. This isn't just about one bad remake, it's about a larger trend in Hollywood that's pushing away audiences by focusing too much on politics and not enough on storytelling. And it's not just Disney that needs to reconsider its approach. Hollywood at large has a serious problem. If studios continue down this path of virtue signaling and overcorrecting, they risk losing their audience entirely. If Snow White has taught us anything, it's that fans will only tolerate so much before they tune out. It's time for Hollywood to get back to what made movies magical in the first place: storytelling that connects with people, regardless of their political views. So, was Disney's Snow White doomed from the start, or could it have been saved by a different approach? On one hand, it's clear that the changes to the story, ripping out the romance, ditching the dwarves, and replacing them with CGI creatures, were a misstep that alienated fans of the original. But on the other hand, the real problem might have been the film's star, Rachel Zegler, and the political baggage that came with her outspoken persona. Was it her controversial statements that pushed audiences away before they even saw the film? Or was it the combination of her attitude and Disney's misguided attempt to modernize a classic that led to this disaster? Either way, the result is the same. Snow White failed spectacularly, both at the box office and in the court of public opinion, and this might just be the wake-up call Hollywood needs. Studios can no longer afford to alienate fans by prioritizing politics over storytelling. People go to the movies to escape, to enjoy a story that resonates with them, not to be lectured on the latest cultural issues. But Disney's not the only one in the hot seat. The failure of Snow White is a cautionary tale for Hollywood at large. If studios continue to push agendas over authentic storytelling, they'll risk losing the very audience they rely on to succeed. In the end, Disney may have learned the hard way that trying to please everyone can end up pleasing no one. As for Rachel Zegler, only time will tell if she can recover from the backlash and rebuild her career. This may have been her big chance to make a mark in Hollywood, but it's also the moment that left her reputation in shambles. Can she rebound, or will she be remembered as the actress who starred in one of Disney's biggest flops? But regardless of what happens next, Snow White stands as a warning sign in the entertainment industry. If Hollywood doesn't start listening to its audience and putting storytelling first, the next big remake might be just as big a failure. And who knows, maybe the future of Disney and Hollywood at large lies in remembering what made them great in the first place. Heartfelt, timeless stories that unite, not divide. What do you think? Could Disney have salvaged this remake by staying true to the original story? Or was the mix of heavy-handed messaging and a polarizing star just a recipe for disaster? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and brace yourselves for the next big remake Disney attempts. If Snow White is any indication, we might all want to keep our expectations in check.